From the food we eat, the air we breathe, the land we dwell, to the health of our body and mind and the well-being of all things in the universe. Unlock the science with Chula Radio Plus.
Welcome to Unlock the Science. I'm Virada Salim, responsible for a vast number of casualties in countries around the world. Terrorism not only brings about widespread horror and concerns, but also leaves governments as well as international organizations struggling to handle. First, let us go through what the word terrorism means in layman's terms and from an academic perspective. According to Oxford Dictionary, terrorism means the act of violence with a view to achieving political objectives or coercing a government. On the other hand, Professor John Philip Jenkins, who is a renowned academic at Baylor University in the United States, defines terrorism as an organized violent act to spread fear in the general population to achieve a particular political motive. However, the United Nations notes that there is no universal definition of terrorism yet. Each country comes up with its own way of interpretation based on its legal system and national context. To specify, nations define terrorism in terms of the number of people involved differently. For example, definition given by Germany, Spain, Israel, and Italy includes joint efforts, whereas an individual conducts a violent act with a political motive in France can be viewed as a terrorist. The United Nations further attributes this lack of consensus to the constant development of terrorism concept, as well as the need to differentiate terrorist acts from other forms of violence. What exactly is the difference between terrorism and other violent crimes then? In one of his interviews, Professor Dr. Surachat Bamrungsuk, a well-respected academic of Department of International Relations, Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, whose expertise includes security affairs, pointed out that whether an act of violence can be categorized as terrorism lies in the motives of the offender. He said, I quote, "If the motive of the attack is personal, even if the attack is violent, it can't be considered terrorism. Like the case of a student who shot friends and teachers in school. Although it's violent, it may not be terrorism. But if the student is found following the website of a terrorist movement and commits mass shooting of friends, this may be an act of terrorism." End of the quote. Professor Surachat further explained that although violence is part of a crime, it is not carried out to achieve any political objectives or changes. This is a stark contrast to terrorism. One of the deadliest attacks which has placed many nations on alert of terrorism threats took place in the United States on the 11th of September 2001. On that monumental date, a network of terrorists seized 4 commercial planes and collided them into 2 landmarks and 1 area. 2 of them crashed into the twin towers of the World Trade Center complex located in New York City, 1 into the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C., and 1 in the vicinity of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These attacks not only led to extensive damage of 2 facilities, but also caused approximately 3,000 fatalities. According to the Global Terrorism Index 2022, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia were the top 3 countries suffering from the consequences of terrorism in 2021. These 3 countries are located in South Asia, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. These regions and North Africa also recorded the highest number of attacks and deaths from terrorism since 2007. The index attributed increased terrorism to intensifying conflict. Data of the index also showed that nearly every terrorist attack in 2021 happened in conflict-stricken countries. The more intense conflicts a nation encounters, the deadlier terrorist attacks become. By contrast, the number of terrorist attacks in the West saw a drastic decrease in the past 3 years, with the United States seeing its record low score ever since 2015. In addition, Russia and Eurasia witnessed the largest improvement as casualties caused by terrorism decreased by over 70%. The Global Terrorism Index, published by the Institute for Economics and Peace, an independent think tank focusing on peace that is based in Sydney, Australia, analyzes the effects of terrorism in 163 nations around the world based on four indicators, namely the total number of terrorist incidents, fatalities, injuries, and hostages captured in a year. All the set indicators are weighed over 5 years to calculate the final score for one country. To gain more insights into the global tourism landscape, Unlock the Science reporter Ha Wang Mang talks to Associate Professor Dr. Kumar Ramakrishna, who currently acts as the Provost Chair and Research Advisor in National Security Studies Program, Associate Dean in Policy Studies, and Head of International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Associate Professor Kumar also serves on international boards of several peer-reviewed journals and co-edited two widely recognized books on counterterrorism.
The Global Terrorism Index noted that intense conflicts led to increased terrorism. Besides conflicts, what are other major reasons for high terrorism activity?
Well, it is true that if you look at conflict zones around the world, terrorism tends to be associated with conflict zones because in conflict zones you have displaced persons who are aggrieved, do not have jobs, have lost their homes, and they become easy prey for extremist recruiters. Having said that, so there are other factors as well. So if you look at conflict zones, we could say that that's the macro level explanation, but it's also the meso level or organizational explanation, because you need to have groups, you need to have networks that indoctrinate and recruit these aggrieved individuals. So you have the conflict zone, you have the organizations like, for example, Islamic State or Al Qaeda, and at the individual level or micro level, you also need to have a right kind of personality, because not all individuals will behave in the same way. Some individuals are more impressionable than others. So to have a more holistic picture of as to why terrorism occurs, conflict zones is one factor at a structural level. At the macro level, meso level is the organization. You need organization, the enabling group, and at the individual level, you need a vulnerable individual, right? So in fact, this explanation of macro, meso, and micro can apply even beyond conflict zones. It can be in other parts of the world. So I'll leave it at that.
Where are the current terrorism hotspots globally, and is there any place which is prone to terrorism in the near future?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you look at the world right now, of course, Iraq and Syria is where for the past decade or so, there's been problems. We saw the Islamic State, ISIS State emerge from Iraq and Syria. Although the Islamic State lost their territorial holdings in March 2019 when the last stronghold was defeated by the international coalition against them, they have survived online. So ISIS is still very active online. And at the same time, because of the pandemic, we have seen indicators that ISIS may actually be coming back in places like Iraq and Syria. But having said that, if you look at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa is where there's a lot of ISIS Islamic State activity as well. So, for example, in the Islamic State West African province is very active and has been engaging in a lot of attacks in sub-Saharan Africa. And in fact, ISIS Central, the propaganda organ, has identified Africa as a land of hijrah or land of migration. Apart from the Levant, which is Iraq and Syria, Africa is actually the next land of where they can try to re-establish their global caliphate. So that's very interesting what was happening in Africa. If you look at Southeast Asia, right, I mean, of course, we had the long time insurgency in southern Philippines, and of course in 2017, for 5 months between May and October 2017, there was this fighting between the Philippine armed forces and threat groups associated with ISIS. Now, the situation has improved because there's been political progress. So that now we have the BARM, or the Bangsa-Moro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, which has helped to address some of the grievances of the population in that part of southern Philippines. But the threat is still there because if you don't deal with issues like poverty or providing employment and jobs, and proper schooling for young people and getting people their homes back, the pace of reconstruction, for especially of Marawi city, which was destroyed by the fighting, that's very important. So we have to watch and see what the new Philippine president and his administration are able to do to sort of enhance the pace of Marawi reconstruction so as to reduce the potential grievances that may drive, especially young people, into the arms of the extremists. So that's the situation, rough situation in Southeast Asia.
Do you think domestic terrorism contributes to the public discrimination of different cultures and subcultures related to terrorists and hence to the damage of national unity?
Yeah, this is a very important question. It is important for our societies to realize that if you look at how, for example, in Southeast Asia, in Southeast Asia at least, the biggest threat is the Islamist extremist threat, right? The way the Islamist extremist threat groups operate is they try to divide societies, so they want to pit different communities against each other, because if you do that and you create a interracial or interreligious conflict, you create a conflict zone, as we discussed, and in such a conflict, it is easier to radicalize people because the threat groups are exploiting fear and anxiety and tensions, and they can recruit. And so this is something to keep in mind, because, so for example, if you look at the case of Singapore, 20 years ago, the JI, the Jamaah Islamiyah terrorist network that was affiliated to Al-Qaeda, JI came from Indonesia. It was an offshoot of the old separatist movement called Darul Islam in Indonesia that wanted to create Islamic State Indonesia. So JI wanted to create a Southeast Asian caliphate 20 years ago, before ISIS even emerged on the scene. So JI's strategy was always to create fighting between different groups, for example, Christians and Muslims. In the case of Singapore, JI wanted to precipitate a conflict between Singapore and Malaysia, because Malaysia is mainly Malay Muslims, Singapore is Chinese, right? Because divided societies, divided communities would be something which terrorist groups look for. So it is true, it is important not to underestimate the willingness of the threat groups to try to polarize society and create a situation which they can recruit. On the other hand, the government response is also important, because if the government and the society responds to a terrorist attack by blaming a particular group, that will make the situation even worse and make it easier for the terrorist groups to recruit people from that stigmatized community as well.
What are some important things that ASEAN nations, which are not hotspots for terrorism, should note to improve the future counter-terrorism policies?
I think in the past 20 years, a lot has been happening within the ASEAN domain in terms of security and intelligence cooperation, collaboration at the government-to-government official levels. There's a lot of political support for greater collaboration in terms of sharing of information and collaborating in counterterrorism, because ASEAN countries know that because transnational terrorism does not respect national borders, the response to transnational terrorism must also be transnational. No country can deal with the threat of, for example, ISIS by itself, because ISIS has a global view, and the same for Al-Qaeda. And ISIS ideology, extremist ideology, circulates across national borders very easily through social media. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of collaborating amongst not just governments, but amongst civil society organizations, amongst academia, to sort of collaborate and exchange ideas and to come together to promote not just a whole of government, but a whole of society and a whole of ASEAN community approach to dealing with the transnational terrorist threat.
That is Unlock the Science reporter Ha Wang Mang talking to Associate Professor Dr. Guma Ramakrishna, Head of International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. We will take a short break now.
You are listening to Unlock the Science on Chula Radio Plus.
Compared to other regions, Southeast Asia is not a hotspot of terrorist attacks. However, this does not mean that there is no persistent terrorism in the region. Unlock the Science will now discuss about the terrorist landscape in Thailand, which was ranked second by the Global Terrorism Index in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of casualties from terrorism in 2021. There are two notable incidents in the country that have highlighted the perpetual threats of terrorism. First comes the 2015 bombing at Ratchaprasong intersection in Bangkok. To be more specific, it took place at Erawan Shrine, which is one of the most significant religious venues, attracting hundreds of locals and foreign tourists each day who come to pay their worship. The bombing resulted in 20 fatalities and injured over 100 people. The capital has never seen an attack of such scale before then, thus putting terrorism threats in urban areas high on the agenda. The second incident, which is a continued situation rather than a single incident, has been persisting for years in the southernmost region of Thailand and been known as the Deep South insurgency. The Deep South refers to Yala, Pattani, and Narathiwat provinces, but also includes certain parts of another adjoining province of Songkhla. The violence has persisted for a long time because several insurgent groups constantly demand independence, and they also enjoy support from some local people. In the past 18 years, this continued violence resulted in over 7,000 fatalities and tens of thousands of injuries, as well as security incidents in the Deep South, according to Deep South Watch, a conflict incident database operated by Thai researchers. Peace dialogues between the Thai government and these insurgent groups have taken place over the past decade, but the conflict is far from being settled. To understand more about terrorism threats as well as the treatment of the Deep South insurgency in Thailand, Unlock the Science reporter Ha Wang Mang talks to Dr. Hassachai Mangkhang of Department of International Relations, Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. Before his retirement and working as an academic, Dr. Hassachai used to serve as a captain with the Thai Navy.
What are the major reasons for the continued violence in the Deep South of Thailand?
Okay. Under current global context, with the spread of democracy and self-determination in liberal world order, secessionism is always possible. It means like minorities separating from the majority of the country. Therefore, the insurgents in the Deep South of Thailand continue to hope for their own sovereignty. For example, in Southeast Asia, we can see active separation movements in Aceh and Western New Guinea, in Indonesia, Johor, Penang, Sarawak and Sabah in Malaysia, and many states in Myanmar. Also, with the continuation of pan-Islamism and terrorism as their main strategy, the insurgents still possible to receive aids from their Muslim brothers. By saying this, I do not mean Islamism is a cause of violence. Instead, Islamism and Muslim Brotherhood are exploited for their political purpose by creating the sense of shared identity across Thai border.
It seems that Thai government have avoided calling any incidents as an act of terrorism. What do you think is the reason for such avoidance?
The major reason is that Thai governments see the violence more like secessionism rather than international terrorism. I mean, if terrorism were a case, the problem would be more complex because it would involve transnational actors such as terrorists who aim for different purposes. But the deep south of Thailand, in deep south of Thailand, the problem is more like secessionism. So the purpose is quite clear. Also, Thai government might try to contain the violence within Thai sovereign territory. Otherwise, it might drag other countries like Malaysia to get involved in this problem, and the solution would become a lot more difficult and complex. Like I mentioned in the first question, the sentiment of Muslim Brotherhood has an effect on violence also because it is employed as political tool for secession. Therefore, I think that Thai government they have avoided calling any incidents as an act of terrorism because they want the problem not to be so complicated that they cannot handle.
When we talk about terrorism, do you think Thailand is under any threat of terrorism in the near future or in the longer term?
Okay, I think that as long as the current political situation and government right now remains the same, any threat of terrorism for Thailand is under control, if not totally disappears. The main reason is that they have good uh, ability. The ability of Thai security agencies, both military and police, they realize what that is, the real force, the major force, and they plan and act accordingly, according to the cause. So I think they could contain it. Also, the threat of international terrorism seems to reduce recently with the imminence of conventional war, such as the war in Ukraine. So all the attentions they pay to the war between Russia and Ukraine right now. So terrorism seems to reduce or decrease in the future.
How well informed are Thai citizens of the terrorism threats and how to react when terrorism happens?
The answer might be quite a bad news for us because I think Thai people are not quite well informed about terrorism. And we tend to easily forget about the previous terrorist incidents, such as the 2006 Bangkok bombing, which took place in 9 locations all over Bangkok. Back then, it might be because Thais are too optimistic and they are careless of any kind of security issues which are not obvious or relevant to their daily life. So when the incident occurs, they are not really prepared for it. So it's quite a bad news for us.
Do you think the issue of terrorism should be included in the curriculum of Thai education?
Absolutely. Some people might argue that terrorism is a sensitive issue and might not be appropriate for students to learn. I quite disagree. I think that the problem is not about the sensitivity of the issue. I think the problem is more about the content of the terrorism. It is about the content that fits for each level of education. For example, in primary school, kids might need to know what terrorism is And in secondary school, they might want to know how to deal with to protect themselves from terrorism and how to deal with it when when it occurs. But in university, students might have to analyze and understand terrorism. So it's about the content of what we want to teach them. So I still insist that the issue of terrorism should be included in curriculum of Thai education.
Associate Professor Kumar from Nanyang Technological University told Unlock the Science that countries in Southeast Asia have gone a long way in improving their counter-terrorist measures over the past 2 decades. However, more measures in dealing with extremist ideas which are circulating on social media and exploiting socio-economic situation need to be introduced to better cope with terrorism. Also, he strongly advised people to exercise more caution now that countries have opened their borders again for international travels after 2 years of lockdowns due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as international movement could facilitate terrorist acts. Both Dr. Hassachai from Chulalongkorn University and Associate Professor Kumar stressed that education of terrorism is crucial if countries are to raise awareness of the issue among its population, curb discrimination of cultures and subcultures associated with terrorists, and strengthen national security. Unlock the Science would like to thank Associate Professor Dr. Kumar Ramakrishna, Head of International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and Dr. Hassachai Mangkang of Department of International Relations, Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. I hope you enjoy our program. You can listen to Unlock the Science on Chula Radio Plus at FM 101.5 every Saturday from 1 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. You can also listen and follow us on our website, curadio.chula.ac.th, and our Facebook page. Our show is also accessible as podcasts, including on Apple and Spotify. See you again next Saturday. Have a nice day.
Unlock the Science is edited and produced by Sinfa Tunsorawut